My name's Grace. I am a former Naropa student. I went to Naropa in 2020 to 2022. And today I'm going to be explaining my experience at Naropa and why I think it's a cult. Before I get started, I want to give a disclaimer that Naropa is a Buddhist institution and there are stories about people who are East Asian and Tibetan and Buddhist, and I'm not trying to make any generalizations about any Tibetan people, Buddhist people, Asian people at all, and especially considering there is a Stop Asian Hate movement that's been gaining steam for the past couple years that I'm fully on board with. I don't mean to contribute to that in any way because I know that that could have some interesting dynamics considering the race of the people we're talking about. However, I am just talking about my experience at Naropa University, which occurred in the United States, in Colorado, and that's what I'm talking about. And I'm making this video because I want to warn potential students of what I think is a scam and a cult. And if you're watching this video because you're scrolling through looking at different videos of people going to Naropa and wanting to see what it's like, I really hope that this comes across on your search because you need to hear this. And if you live in Boulder and you don't know any about this yet, just keep on listening to hear what I have to say. So we'll start a little bit with the history of Naropa and Chögyam Trungpa. So Chögyam Trungpa was the founder of Naropa, and I have a difficulty saying his name, and I don't like pronouncing people's names wrong, so I'm just going to be referring to him as CT. So CT is Chögyam Trungpa. And he was the founder of Naropa. He's a Buddhist teacher, and his most notable work is centered around meditation. He coined the terms like being a peaceful warrior and seeing the basic goodness in all humans. And that was one of his main things is people are basically good and people are born good, and to see the good in all humans. Now, knowing what I know now, I do think that CT used the concept of basic goodness to groom his students into trusting him as a good person, but we'll get to that later. So CT ran Naropa. It was then called the Naropa Institute. It later became the Naropa University after some accreditation, and also had a publication company and offshoot cult called Shambhala, which operates mainly in Colorado, Canada, and Vermont. CT had several accusations of sleeping with his students, and he was married to Diana Mukpa when she was just 16, and she wrote in her memoir that he often beat her. And there have also been other women over the past years this happened in the 1960s is when he founded this. So since then and until his death, people have come forward and said that they sexually abused him, which I will now be referring to as SA. So SA is sexual abuse, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube, so that's what that means. So a lot of people have come forward with SA accusations and beating his wives or his students, really, I would say girlfriends, but his students, like physically beating them. And he also was an alcoholic, and he died at age 48 due to liver failure by severe alcohol and drug abuse. Reading from the Boulder Beat News, which is a local news source here in Boulder, his successor was Thomas Rich, known as Ozell Tenzin. And as stated on Wikipedia, while knowingly HIV positive, Tenzin was sexually involved with students, one of whom became infected and died. He claimed that Trungpa told him that the Dharma was his protection. If you don't know what that means, the Dharma is kind of like, basically you could say it's a word for kind of like the way, the Buddhist way of life. Practicing Buddhism is the Dharma, and he basically was saying, that's kind of the watered down version, but it seems as if CT was saying that because you do this practice and because you're part of this Dharma, you're protected, you're okay, your karma is okay, you're going to still be reincarnated, you're all good type of thing, which is horrible. The Shambhala Board of Directors knew about it and kept it secret for a few years. The current president of Naropa, Charles Leaf, and remember that because I'm going to mention that later, was a board member during that time. When the information came out, it became a scandal that nearly destroyed Shambhala. Trungpa Sen then went on to run Shambhala, and for the past 2 years, Shambhala has been engulfed in a major crisis. And Trungpa's son is Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche, but I might just call him CT's son or Trungpa's son, so I don't butcher that name. In 2018, a group called Buddhist Project Sunshine published a series of 3 reports on sexual violence in Shambhala. Naropa currently insists that they've disaffiliated from Shambhala after the recent scandal with Trungpa's son. However, it's important to know that the misconduct that happened in the past is still not being acknowledged and prevented today. So that's a little bit of background on all the messed up stuff that's happened in Naropa in the past and really the recent past. A little bit about me and my experience, if you don't know me. I started Naropa in 2020. I graduated high school 2 years prior. I had left a very toxic and abusive home and a very, very tough upbringing. And the details I won't get into for this video, but I'm saying that because I want you to know that I was lonely. I was feeling the weight of all the trauma of my childhood. And I started being interested in psychology and helping others, and I wanted to get a psychology degree. And I didn't feel like I could handle the academic rigor of getting a college degree, as I had struggled a lot in high school due to environmental factors, factors about my life and my upbringing. I mean, we know that it's hard for children to do well in school and teens to do well in school when they're having a rough home life, and that was kind of what I was going through. So I had a very low GPA, and I never took the SATs, and I was very scared of failing classes again like I did in high school. And I also have ADHD, which is a learning disorder, and completing assignments is difficult for me. So I felt very insecure and not good enough for college. So when I did decide I want to get a degree, but I don't know how, because I don't know if I want to go to like a school, I found Naropa like online just through searching like alternative colleges. And I found it as like an alternative school for people who didn't like fit the mold into like typical academia, excuse me. It seemed perfect for me, so I planned to go there before COVID hit, and then COVID happened, and then I ended up still moving to Boulder in August of 2020 when we were kind of able to like move around again. And the pandemic was still happening, but we could do school in a hybrid format, which was like, they called it hybrid. It was like some online, some in person, but with masks. So, I mean, I'm not going to touch too much on the online format because that was not Naropa's fault. Like, that was just how schools were at the time. If you went to college during that time, you know that it really was not the best situation to have to do on school online, especially for a lot of people, me included. But that wasn't really their fault, so I'm not going to touch too much upon that. So yeah, I ended up going to Naropa in 2020, and I'm going to get into a little bit of what I think was the financial scam of Naropa. So I felt like I was being lured in, kind of. Like when I went on there and I went on the website and was like, I'm interested, send me info. Like financial aid people started calling me, and like the advisors started calling me, and it almost felt like they were trying to like convert you to a religion, which like sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but they called me a lot and were like really trying to email me, are you interested? Do you want to come? And I was like, yeah. And I come from a very low income background, and so I like don't have money to go to college lying around. Like my parents don't have a college fund for me. I'm only saying this just because it gives context of the fact that I have to take out loans in order to go to college. I mean, along with many other students in this world, because college is expensive these days. But some people do have people who, parents or whatever, who have college funds for them, who have money to pay for their education. And it does seem as if, from my observing, the student body of Naropa is generally on the more wealthy side. I was definitely not in that tax bracket. And so I had to take out thousands and thousands of dollars in loans. I am about $10,000 in federal student debt just from my year and a half that I went to Naropa. And I also have a private loan that I haven't paid off, and I paid some out-of-pocket money as well. So it's embarrassing to say, but I am in debt from Naropa, and I feel ashamed and embarrassed about that. But I felt as if they guilted me for not having enough money to attend when I started looking at the price of it and being like, oh God, how am I going to pay for this? Like, I don't know how to pay for this. And guys, when I tell you, this is seriously what the financial aid advisor told me. She said, well, when we were talking about my financial situation, and I was like, oh, I have about $10,000, like, kind of overdue balance. Like, after everything's said and done, I got some scholarships, and then I still had a lot of money left over, and I said, I don't know where I'm gonna get that. And she said, well, why don't your parents pay for it? And I was like, oh, that's just not my situation. And she said, well, you're literally, and I quote, well, your parents should have been saving for this your whole life. And I was like, what? And like, granted, I did end up like telling that to a staff member at Naropa because I felt that was just unacceptable in general to say, but I do also feel like that was a way for them to like guilt me and make me feel like even more lured in. Like, you're right, like I have to go to this, like how dare my parents not support my education, like I have to take out a loan. And like, she convinced me to take out loans, and then like I had to like beg one of my parents to please take out like a couple $1,000s in loans, which ended up working because I feel like they lured me in and used manipulation tactics to say like, convince your parents to take out loans for us, convince your parents and all of this. And I ended up doing that, and it wasn't very much. It was only like $1,000, but still, like, that's $1,000 that I asked my mom to take out a loan for me. I did get financial aid. I got a Naropa grant, which I think was like, it was definitely a few $1,000s, which was weird because it was like, what is the Naropa grant? Who's it coming from? And where is it going to? Because if it's just like a grant within the university, it's like, is that actual money, or are they just like saying that? Like, I don't want to speak too much about that in a way that might get me like cease and desisted, but like, what is the Naropa grant? Who's it going to? Who's it coming from? Where's it going to? And I got like a lot of like grants from the school, and I'm like, I'm just confused on where this is like coming from in a way. And even with that, it was still like $27,000 a year, or even a semester. I think it was insane. It was literally crazy. It was like more money than most universities. Like, I'm paying in-state for like a big university that I go to now, and it was definitely more money to go to Naropa. And I acknowledge this was my choice to attend. This was my stupid financial decisions. But I definitely feel as if they prey on people who have money usually. Usually the people who go there like have a lot of money. Like, I know that sounds like I'm generalizing people, but it's true. And unfortunately, the lower income people like me get sucked in too, and they have to find some way to pay for it. And so I think that they keep you locked in with the sunk cost fallacy. So the sunk cost fallacy is a term in psychology, and it's where you feel like you've invested so much into something that you can't quit now, even though you know deep down it would not be worth it to continue. Many students had the experience Many students I know had the experience where they went to Naropa for a few semesters. They didn't have a good experience, maybe for the reasons that I'm going to be talking about, or maybe for different reasons, but they still stayed and they graduated because upon trying to transfer to another university, they found out none of their credits would transfer because there's no equivalent course there. Like, there's some courses there that like are just like woo-woo stuff. I know I hate saying that because I'm kind of like a spiritual woo-woo person too, but like there are classes like that where you took that there, you're not going to go to a university and they're going to have an equivalent course for like sources of healing, or like other classes, like one of them was like the 5 elements of blah blah blah, and it's like they're not going to transfer. That's just not how transferring courses works. And that's what happened to me. Because when I realized I wanted to leave, but I still wanted to get a degree, I didn't want to leave college completely. I still wanted a degree, but I decided to leave, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. I just tried to transfer to like the big state school in my area, and I had 30-something credits from Naropa from doing 3 semesters, and the school I transferred to accepted 2 classes. I got 2 classes to transfer. I would end up going to a community college to get enough credits to be able to like transfer in and get everything kind of ready. But I basically had to start over as like basically a freshman. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did, and then I didn't fall to the sunk cost fallacy. It's a really hard word to say. Because a lot of people do. And it's weird though, because it's like a contradiction. Like, the graduation rate at Naropa is 58%, which like isn't very much for a university. They're usually pretty high, and the acceptance rate is like 100%. Like, there's no one that doesn't get in. Like, I don't think you even had to really do anything. You just had to like write a essay of why you wanted to go there. And so most people that I knew when I started dropped out. Like, that's almost half the people that you go in there with the class, like, are gone. And there isn't really that many people that enroll anyway. So if you go in with only like 100 something in your class, you end up like after the first year, there was like literally like just a handful of people that I knew that like still actually went there. And so it's safe to say that they aren't very good at holding people in the cult long term anymore. But that doesn't mean that it's not a cult and that they don't use manipulation tactics, which I'll touch on more soon. So, education. So courses are advertised online and in the course catalog, but when I went to register for classes, they weren't there. Options were very slim. Like, I would go to register for classes and I'd have like a couple options for things to take. Like, they had a couple psychology courses, but they advertised that they had a whole theater and dance and music program, and then I went to like sign up for those as electives and whatnot because I'm also a dancer. I love to dance and I wanted to incorporate that into it, and there was one. And that happened for most of the programs. Like, the psychology classes they said that they had, they didn't have. Like, they would have stuff in their course catalog be like, this is happening, and then when you go to the registration, they'd be like, it would be listed, but it would be like not happening this semester. There'd be no professor, like it just wouldn't be there at all. And it was just confusing. It was like, what do you mean? You advertise this whole program, but you don't have any of the classes actually running? The classes I did took were a doozy. The syllabus was often disregarded, and we just sit around in a circle and we'd talk about the book that we read, which was often something written by CT. And I could have just bought the book for much cheaper than it costs to go there. I remember feeling that so many times where we would literally sit in a circle and be like, so we read this last time. Who wants to talk? Who wants to share their thoughts of what the book that we read? There was never lectures. Most professors were against a lecture-based class, which led to like this discussion-based class that they like advertise on their website and they pride themselves about. And I thought it sounded like a good idea, but it just ends up being unproductive. It's not centered around course material. It's just like a bunch of people sitting in a circle, and of course it's always like the white men who want to run their mouth and talk about their opinion on the book. And it's like, that's actually not why I'm getting an education, to like learn from the other students. I like actually want to learn something. And it just felt like literally a book club, but also like group therapy all at once. Like there were several courses that were taught by professionals that were great, but many were unqualified and had just gotten Naropa master's degrees. Like the pipeline from getting a Naropa master's degree to then teaching a course and teaching your first course, or also being a grad student and teaching your first course, which is normal in the university world. But given the context that it's a cult, that's just keeping them within the circle. Most classes were over Zoom during the pandemic, but we still paid the full amount of courses. Like the tuition wasn't cut in half. There was no discount on the tuition or anything. And we still paid like student activity fees and stuff, even though we didn't get to even do it in person the first year. Somehow I still was in a cult that was like being run online, but I did also live there. I lived on campus, so that's part of it as well. So I am doing a BA in psychology with a minor in dance right now, and I want to eventually be a dance movement therapist. And I want to be a therapist. I want to incorporate dance and psychology. So Naropa has a grad program for dance movement therapy. And when I was starting to think about like leaving, going to a different school, I was talking to an advisor because I was like, I'm interested in going to this grad program for dance movement therapy after I graduate with my BA. But the problem is, Naropa only has like 1 or 2 dance classes. The first year I was there, it was only 1. The second year they had a second one. Naropa only has 2 dance like classes. That's not enough credits because the the MA in dance movement therapy required a certain amount of dance credits from a university. And I was like, how am I supposed to obtain that? And the advisor was like, yeah, I don't know. I've never thought about that. Like I could see the wheels turning, being like, oh shoot, like you're right. You physically could not get a Naropa undergrad degree and then immediately go to the grad school there. Like how could they even require that when they couldn't even provide that? It makes zero sense. There was very little, if not no homework. Exams literally were not allowed to do. You were not allowed to like have exams. They had a warrior exam one time, but it was like, that was what they called it. It was literally like you get called on about a question, but they give you the questions beforehand, and they're just like, how do you become a spiritual warrior? Like something just like very vague, and everyone got an A. Projects were always easy to fake. I always got an A. I never got any actual constructive feedback on things that I worked on. In the beginning, I actually sat down and did essays. I actually worked on like assignments, and then I realized that like I was literally getting 100% on everything, and it seemed like the professors were not even reading my work. They weren't giving me any feedback. I was literally getting 100 on everything, and like, yeah, I mean, I thought I did good work, but I was getting frustrated. I was like, I can literally just fake this, and I did. And I didn't like that culture of being able to just like, oh, like it doesn't even matter. And at first this was really alluring because, like I said, I struggled in high school, but I actually now really enjoy writing essays. I really love making creative projects, and it was discouraging. It was literally discouraging to get A's, which was weird. It was just like a weird feeling of like, oh, they don't actually want to provide me with any education. They're just like giving me an A. The homework in many classes was to sit and meditate. It was literally just like, okay, like there were more than 3 classes I can think of off the top of my head where it was like, okay, your assignment for the entire year is to find your meditation spot, which like I think is great. I think it's beautiful. I do still love meditation and yoga. I'm not dissing on the practice. All of this I want to disclaim. I'm not dissing on Buddhism, meditation, or yoga as a practice. I'm dissing on this specific delivery of it. And that was like the homework for the whole year. Find your sit spot and sit there once a day and meditate. And it's like, okay, and then what? Like, and then what? Like, yeah, I tried to sometimes, but I found that I wasn't really like being held accountable. Like, and what was that supposed to like accomplish for my like grade, I guess? I don't know. Finals were pretty much always just write a one-page reflection of what you've learned. But for some classes where I feel like I didn't learn anything because we just read the book, like I said, or just like talked about stuff and just talked about the world and issues, and it wasn't really related to the course, I kind of just like wrote back and regurgitated this what was on the syllabus, because I felt uncomfortable being like, I didn't learn anything and I didn't like this class when it was technically my final for the class and my name was going to be attached to it. Like if I was like giving anonymous course feedback, I definitely like would say that, but it wasn't. It was like write a reflection about what you've learned for a grade. And like I said, you get an A on everything, but it's still a professor. They still have the power to fail you. So it just was an uncomfortable situation for me where I was like, I don't feel comfortable like expressing that I don't feel like this is worth my time as a grade. That's weird to me. It just doesn't really feel like ethical in a way, I think. And I will say I did really, really enjoy like honestly a handful, like very, very few, maybe 4 classes out of all the ones I took I thought were very well done. One was the dance class. The dance professor there is like absolutely life-changing and amazing, and I still like am in touch with her to this day. But she also got her degree at CU and like has other projects that she's doing. And the general psych class was really good, like Psych 101, but it was because the professor taught the same class at CU. And so she was just teaching the same thing that you'd get at the other state university is what I'm talking about, CU. I didn't want to reveal that, but whatever. And it was just like a weird dynamic in the class. It just like wasn't worth it. I cannot express enough how little I actually like learned in terms of education, how little I actually accomplished and did, and how I could just like, I just felt like I was getting nothing done, and I was just like paying money to like not do anything worthwhile. So that was the education section. Now we're going to move on to emotional manipulation and control. So in the first semester, everyone was required to take this class called the Naropa seminar, or I think it was called the contemplative seminar, contemplative being like contemplation or like mindfulness. And that is kind of the seminar where they're trying to start the indoctrination into their language, their vocabulary. You learn things like the beginner's mind. You had to write a bunch of things about having the beginner's mind, which is CT. Remember the guy I said earlier, CT. His teachings about like starting fresh and like not judging something before you come to it, and like having a beginner's mind and emptying your mind before coming to class. And it's like, yes, I think some of the stuff he taught was like useful, but also like when you put it in context of what he did to people, it's just creepy. And it seems as if there's a lot of teaching about loss of identity. There's a lot of teaching about clear who you are and let go of who you are and come here with nothing. Come to class with nothing. Read these teachings with nothing. No identity. Let go of who you are. Which can be really harmful. I mean, that's like a common cult tactic, is to like make you lose your identity and then find your identity in what they're teaching, what they're selling to you. That's like cult tactic number 1. And at first I felt really enchanted because everyone in the like orientation and on the website and everything is like, you're here, you're part of our community, like you're so special, you're so spiritual, you belong here, thank you for choosing this. And I don't know, it just made me feel really good about myself at first, and I felt enchanted, and like I remember being like, I feel like I'm going to Hogwarts, I'm in like this like cool magic school. Didn't turn out to be what I thought it was going to be and what they sold it. And since they didn't lecture and most classes were discussion based, it literally turned into group therapy with no therapist. This left me feeling emotionally drained and exhausted at all times from constantly hearing people's emotions. In this Naropa seminar, I'd be like, so how did you all feel about the reading last night? And then people would like literally go off and be like, it just triggered me because I went through this and this and this and this. And just like, that's fine. I eventually want to be a therapist. It's just like I'm not a therapist now, so I don't have the tools to like deal with people's problems in that way, especially when they're like non-consensually like thrown at me at all times during all classes. And I just felt so emotionally drained and exhausted all the time. So after one of these Naropa seminar classes one day, I was crying because the class started with what was supposed to be a "how are you" check-in. Everybody go around the room and say a couple words of how you are. But it lasted the entire hour with every single person talking for like 15 minutes about their deep trauma and how they really are. And it's like, no, I love that you have the ability to name your emotions, and I'm sorry you're going through that, but like, that's not what I thought. I was in a class right now. Like, I'm just confused. Like, there's no trained professional here to like deal with that. So after class, I stayed behind because I was crying, and I'm like crying to the professor, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm crying. I'm just so emotionally exhausted from hearing the weight of this class, and hearing all of that just made me just sob. And it was like, yeah, I was like sympathizing with people, but I was also like deeply empathizing with them. And I also just felt overwhelmed. I felt extremely overwhelmed from having all of those people's emotions just like thrown onto me in a way that I felt like it felt like I was not comfortable with that. And I didn't consent to that. And she said that I was like too empathetic and I needed to learn better skills to like manage my empathy and not be an empath. And like, I definitely felt like she blamed it on me and acted like I was the problem. My empathy was the problem. My not being able to like manage my own emotions was a problem. But honestly, I feel like she was probably feeling the same way and was just like overwhelmed and exhausted because she was taking the job of a group therapist when she signed up to be a college professor. And being so emotionally exhausted, so worn down emotionally from the school, it just not being a good fit for me, it left me in a position where I was now looking to them for the answers. I felt so down, but then I was like, oh, well, now they have the answers. I should just keep deepening my practice. And I was buying into the idea that their way was the way to be healed. I started acting like the others and becoming one of the group. But then I found out about the abuse of power, and it kind of became my last straw. So when I found out that CT had abused his students in the last semester I was there, I really just fell out of love with the teachings. I didn't want to learn about any of his work anymore. When in class, when they would be like, oh, we did the reading from last night, what everyone think about it? And usually we were reading something from CT. I would bring it up and say I didn't really want to do this reading because it was written by CT who abused students. I was like, I didn't read it. I don't want to. I don't feel comfortable. And I would say, do you guys know that he did this? And I got backlash from the students and the professors being like, just separate the work from the person. He had good teachings. Just ignore the abuse and read it anyway. It happened in the past after all, right? But I came to find out that abuse of power, grooming, and sexual abuse weren't just something that happened in the past, but were weaved into the foundation of the organization. When doing a project about improving the school's food system, we were talking about how we could improve getting access to affordable, healthy food on campus. And we had a cafe on campus, in the main campus. And someone spoke up and was like, I actually don't feel safe eating at that cafe because the chef was going on dates with students. And in that moment, I flashed back to this memory of when maybe the first month I was there, when I was talking to this girl who told me that she was dating and having an intimate relationship with the chef, who was also a professor and taught yoga class on campus. And I don't want to tell her story for her because it's not my story, it's hers. So that's all I'm going to say. I do know that he was her current yoga professor while that happened, while they were starting to have an intimate relationship. And while she was 18, he was in her 40s. And we do know, yes, she was not a minor. And age gaps can be a tricky thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but he was her professor. And we know that's a power imbalance that we now recognize as SA. And in that moment in class, when someone said that, I was horrified. I was horrified because I realized that I knew this information. This wasn't the first time I had been hearing it. And the old me would have reported that right away when I heard it the first time. Because I, as a person, I vowed to myself that I always report SA. I have a vow to myself that I'm a mandated reporter. Maybe I'm not by law, but my vow to my inner value is that I'm a mandated reporter. If I hear any SA happening, unless the person telling me were to say, don't report this because it would put my life at risk, I do report it. That's just a vow I have to myself. And I had just been so pushed away from my values and my boundaries. My boundaries had just been pushed on so many times. My emotions had just been broken down, and I didn't report it. And in that moment, I snapped back into myself during that class, and I sat there and I'm like, where am I? And what did I let myself get into? And I was enraged because I realized what I was in. A cult. A cult that lets their leaders groom students into being in relationships with them many times in the past, in the recent past, and then in the present. The professor did handle it very well, in my opinion, because he ended class right there. He said, all right, we're stopping here. I'm ending class because I'm going to make a report right now. So whoever, like the person who reported it, thank you for saying this. Stay back with me. I'm writing a report. If anyone here knows any information, we're going to make a report right now, which I felt like was a good way to handle it. However, the problem is, who would he report it to? I mean, the school has a Title IX office, which is supposed to protect students against stuff like this happening, but how would it handle a situation like this when the founder the cult is worshiping has done the same offense? How could they fire him without dismantling the entire system built upon a leader who abuses students? I mentioned earlier how Charles Leaf, the current president of Naropa, was on the board of directors when Osel Tenzin was found to have been sleeping with students and giving them HIV knowingly. What makes you think that he would punish this person when he let someone else do it before? And someone else do it before? And the thing is, they didn't fire him. As far as I know, at the time of me making this video, he still runs the cafe and teaches the yoga class. And I have no way of finding out if any disciplinary action was done behind the scenes. I have no idea of knowing that, but I know he was not fired. Once I realized I needed to leave and earn a degree elsewhere, I felt lost, hurt, angry, and confused. I knew I was going to withdraw, but where was I to go? I lived in the dorms. I think that's another important thing to say, is that I lived on campus for the full year and a half that I was there. I was surrounded by this community, and it's required that you live on campus. Only the first year. I could have easily not lived on, not easily. That's the thing. I couldn't have lived off campus the second year because I didn't really have enough money, and it was hard being a college student, and I didn't have enough money to pay my own rent, so it was easier to take out loans and then live on campus and stay living in the dorms. That was what was financially feasible for me at the time. So I know most students who withdrew probably went back to their homes, to their parents' houses, but I didn't have a safe home to go back to. I was going through a period of grief and anger. I was literally going through the 7 stages of grief where everything that I felt was my life path was just crumbling. And I felt isolated and ostracized from the Naropa community. Because when I would tell people, and professors too, that I was going to transfer to another university, so many people acted like I was a traitor. And how could I go to a normal school, like a normie? Good luck doing homework, loser. Luckily, I had a few friends that I made in the town that are now still my best friends. Shout out to them. And they went to the big state university, and so they weren't involved with this. We just knew each other from friends of friends. And they helped me with my application to the big state university, and they let me stay the night at their place so many times when I felt uncomfortable living in the dorms, and I just couldn't bear to stay there another night because I knew that I was just in a toxic situation. And eventually I did get accepted to the big state school, but I needed to get some credits done at the local community college before coming because, like I said, I didn't really get a lot of credits transferring over. And that went really well for me. I'm still at the big university of that school, of the state, and I really, really love it. It's going really, really well. But I do remember being at a math help center at the community college, getting some help with algebra homework because I was taking an algebra course, and it was from a professor. A professor help, one-on-one help tutoring type of thing. And I told her I just transferred from Naropa. And she said, you know you were in a cult, right? Naropa is a cult. And I still denied it. I still didn't believe that. It didn't hit me until literally now, 2 years later, when I've taken a social psychology class that talks about the dangers of groupthink and cults, and I've listened to 100 podcasts about cults. I've always loved learning about cults, and I realized I started relating to these survivor stories, and that, oh my God, I was in a cult too. It wasn't like Jonestown or Manson or one of those ones where people die, but it was still a cult. It was one that caused me psychological and financial damage. Upon researching the history of Naropa for this video, I realized something crucial. The Naropa students themselves are not quite the cult. That is just the outer circle of the cult that exists around Shambhala Buddhism and CT. That's the middle of the cult. Naropa University is more out in the recruitment stage. The people in the cult are the people who go through, graduate, and get to the inner circle of alumni and staff members and professors and the president who have been buying into this for decades. But that led me to another important question. If CT is dead, who's the leader? Who benefits? Who's being worshipped? I don't think I have the exact answer to that yet. But what I do think is that the cult members are lost. There's no dear leader to follow. So it becomes the worship of an idea. The idea of spiritual enlightenment that isn't actually attainable. The idea that you'll find yourself, you'll heal, you'll fix all your problems by following their way. It just leads to a group of lost people who continue to try to teach the cult leader's work without having the same level of power and control that he once had. I mean, there's definitely still controlled tactics, but they aren't as effective as they used to be, considering the enrollment is so small and the graduation is so low, as I've stated earlier. So here's my call to action. All this being said, what do I suggest that we do now? My first suggestion, or demand rather, is that Naropa undergrad program gets shut down for good. For so long, I couldn't bring myself to say that because I know by saying that, I'm insulting my friends and my peers who did graduate from a Naropa degree. And am I harming them in their career opportunities by advocating Naropa be abolished? But I realize Naropa is an institution, is doing more harm by promising a college degree by an institution that is not capable of granting that level of education. They hurt vulnerable people like I was by convincing them to take out student loans for a worthless degree that got me nowhere. Now that I go to a big state university and have had such an incredible experience learning and getting an education, I truly believe in the value of a college degree. And I think it's worth it to get a degree, if you want one, and to advance your career. And it's maybe not as necessary in today's modern job market as maybe it once was a couple generations ago. And yes, I do have debt from the university I go to now, but the value of learning from actual qualified professors and a curriculum that has been researched and is qualified and is real is important to me. I don't think Naropa should be allowed to say that they can do anything remotely similar to a bachelor's degree because they don't. Maybe the institution could continue to exist as a learning center where people could just take classes at their own free will, just for their own enjoyment and personal learning. But I'm strongly advocating for Naropa's accreditation to be revoked, at least for the undergrad program. There is still a grad program, and I have zero experience knowing anything about that, really, so I'm not speaking about that. But as far as the undergrad program goes, accreditation should completely be revoked. I still have some guilt, like from being indoctrinated. I still have so much guilt from saying that, because it's like, what's going to happen to my karma by like exposing them? And like, am I being so negative instead of like positive vibes only by saying this? But I have to share my story and hopefully impact the accreditation of Naropa. And you can help me do that by sharing this video to people and getting my message out there. And my main takeaway from this is don't trust spiritual people who ask for your money. That may seem like a huge generalization, but like I seriously live by that now. I don't give people money who promise to have all the answers. I don't trust these fake spiritual gurus. I pay for yoga classes that I go to, but other than that, I read books, I do my own research, and I create my own version of what it means to be connected to spirit and connected to myself. I find communities that fill me up and give me what I need without a paywall. I'm much stronger and smarter now after this experience, and maybe you're watching this and think I'm stupid for going to the school in the first place. And to be honest, I do kind of agree with you a little bit. I do feel stupid. I feel stupid and ashamed and dumb and like a fool. But I'll leave you with one thing to think about, and it's that no one joins a cult. They join a group that makes big promises, and once they wake up and they find out it's not what they said they was, if they ever wake up and find out, it's too late. Stop the recording. End.